Well, welcome to the 24th Fireside Chat. Yes, I did say 24. It seems a long, long time ago that we started this series, but there's a lot of enthusiasm, in fact, for these type of events. Yes. Great pleasure to have Christian with us today. You all know him. Many different titles, sort of heading up the tax department of Siemens, chair of the ICC tax committee, honorary professor at the institute here, well-known personality on the international scene, and I think you're a pretty good father as well, no?
I have two of them, yeah. So we have to ask them, but one can't speak yet.
Well, the next time we have the fireside chat, we'll bring the kids and the wife along, and we'll get the two story of how you reconcile all these things.
Oh, better not.
Oh, it was very dangerous. Well, today we've obviously chosen the right topic, which is the end of the arm's length principle. Please note there's a question mark at the end of that, yeah? Maybe, maybe not, yeah? But the reason I say I think it's the right topic, we have a pretty record audience of almost 150 people from 34 countries from around the world, yeah? So there are people that are staying up in Asia to listen to you, Christian. There are people that are getting up in America to listen to you, yeah? And there are Europeans who just have nothing else to do listening to you as well, yeah? We'll have the usual format. I'll give a brief introduction to the topic, and then we'll move into 4 rounds of discussions. Again, audience participation we welcome. So if you have questions, there's a microphone, including we can take questions from the virtual audience as well. They can type the questions in, yeah? Yeah. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions on that, yeah? So let's begin then on the first round then, which is really, where are we going on the arm's length principle? As I said, the title of the whole session is the end of the arm's length principle. And many commentators would say, yes, that's where we're going, yeah? You have India, yeah, that in the context of BEPS has said that, I quote, any outcomes from the current discussion should not be constrained, yeah? Indians like a lot that word constrained, yeah? Should not be constrained by the arm's length standard, yeah? Pascal Saint-Amand, who heads up the OECD, has said he's agnostic on the arm's length principle, yeah? You have, in fact, NGOs who feel that it's outlived its usefulness. You have academics, in fact, who go on and explain why it's such a bad principle because of the outcomes. And you even have some business people that say it's all become too complex, yeah? All become too complex. So the question is, what do we do, yeah? Well, first, do you agree that we need to move on, find something new?
Well, it's always better to contradict, otherwise we don't have this discussion going on. But unfortunately, I wouldn't contradict here too much.
You agree with everything?
I wouldn't agree with everything. So the arm's length principle has served well for many years. It did serve well when it was established, and not many countries were living up to the standards and not even having expertise at all in the matter of transfer pricing. There it served the multinationals very well, because in the 80s and 90s, that was the arena where what now is being called profit shifting was really happening. Yeah? Not so much for my company, I must say, but certainly
they all say that.
I know that they all say that, but for us it's true. But for many others, certainly over time, limitations has been introduced, expertise had been built, capacity developed in pretty much, maybe not all countries, but in most of the developing countries, and even in some of the industrialized countries, which always had their problems with applying the transfer pricing principles, capacity was built up. But honestly, I very much have the feeling that it's more the developing countries which are not so developing any longer, but which always have been unhappy with the allocation of taxation rights since the 1920s, since the League of Nations did develop the first model treaty. And at that point in time,
the League of Nations in 1926 actually were discussing how do you measure value.
Yeah.
They didn't use value as a term, but the concept was the same.
Yeah, exactly. But at that point in time, developing countries, and at that point in time, China was very much developing. It's not developing
Some say
at all.
Chinese is still the developing country, but I don't believe that.
No, that's not true. Honestly, they are fully developed, and in many areas, they are more developed than we are.
Yes.
Right? Especially in the area of digitalization. For others, they might be still developing. but we have some industrialized countries which are still developing too. So, and this allocation, the balance of power has changed dramatically, and now is the time where I believe that they want to change the things.
Yeah.
And you're right. I have many colleagues, and I'm not a transfer pricing person myself. So, in theory, it's a very nice game. It's a very nice construct. The whole thing of transfer pricing, the arm's length principles, all the bells and whistles around. If you wade through the OECD transfer pricing guidelines or the UN manual, it's all very nice. In practice, the world looks totally different, because in practice, when we deal with tax audits, that is not about the sophisticated concepts. No. It's simply not, especially in countries which are not the US, or even in Germany. We are having discussions which are miles away from any high-level theory. So you can really ask the question if the transfer price system, if the arm's length principle ever has been fully alive. And I'm not even sure if that's really true. Yeah, theoretically always, but in many countries it has never been really been applied to its full extent. So it's complex, yes. I still have to be convinced that the proposals out there might make it less complex than it used to be. But I myself would believe we are now seeing the end, the beginning of the end. Maybe let's put it like this.
The beginning of the end, yeah, that's a sort of a nice qualified statement. I suppose it depends in a sense. I mean, you're right in that the theoretical part, I mean, people say this is a good basis from which to begin the discussions. In practice, I mean, when you go out in the field, I mean, the arm's length principle, I see it as, you know, and that's part of the 79 report where it says, you know, arm's length, it's not a science, it's actually much more of a process of negotiation, yeah. And to me, the arm's length principle, what it does, it sets a framework in which you can have that negotiation. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what it is about, yeah. But the interesting question is, if we are going to move away from the arm's length principle, what's on the table? Yeah? And what are the criteria that we should use to judge any alternatives that are put forward? Yeah? And I think there are three criteria. One, which is it has to be principle-based. Yeah? Even though you may apply the principle in a pragmatic fashion, there has to be some principles behind it. Because if there's not some principles behind it, every country will have its own sort of views and interpretation. I think the second thing criteria that you have to judge any proposal by, it has to be capable of getting a global consensus. And that really comes back to your point about the emergence of the BRICS, the emergence of developing countries. They have to feel they're getting their fair share. Yeah? And we can have a long debate over what is fair share, but at the moment they feel it's not working in our end. So that's the second criteria then. Capable of getting a global consensus. And the third criteria, and this comes back to your issue of complexity, it has to be administratively feasible. Yeah? You have to be able to get the information, you have to have the capacity to use it. Yeah? And even some large countries, in fact, find that difficult. Yeah? So I think those are the three criteria that we should judge whatever is put forward.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, if I look at the country I know best, that's Germany. If I look at our audit cycles, we are pretty current in our audit cycles. Our audit team is right now auditing the years 16, 17, and 18. And for 18, we did not even file the return. So I believe you can't be more current in your audit cycle. Until the very last audit cycle, 13, 14, 15, before transfer pricing has never been an issue. No. Right? And you might say, yeah, that's because Siemens is so well behaved and we're not aggressive.
And they have a very good tax director, yeah?
Yeah, which might not be the case because you want to have a certain aggression level in putting your transfer prices. Apparently, we were wasting money, yeah? So we might have had a more aggressive approach. Or the other answer could be that, there's not that much capacity, even in a developed country such as Germany, and they simply, because of that, didn't focus on transfer prices. And that's absolutely true. I believe it's the latter. From the discussions we are having, you can clearly see that, yes, now they are picking up the topic because they see that's nice because it's pretty much negotiating. Yeah, you have this corridor set, and then you can say, I believe it shouldn't be 3, it should be 4%. Yeah? Or vice versa. And honestly, that's why I'm not such a big fan of transfer pricing. I'm a lawyer by education. Yes, there are many things in law which are not clear, but the reasoning and the argumentations, it's a different approach. Yeah? Here it's more like horse trading.
But I mean, I think what has changed in the transfer pricing area over the last 3 years is that the tax administrations have much more information than they had in the past. Particularly the country-by-country reporting. The effect of that hasn't kicked in yet. We're still at the sort of an early stage. The effect of having the master files, the local files, the ability to ask your treaty partners to provide. So in a sense, whereas in the past it was very hard for the tax administration to apply these principles because they didn't have the information, now they have it. Yeah, and I think they're grappling with how do they deal with this, what I call almost like a tsunami of data that they've got. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, but that's true for many areas. This is for exchange. Everything which is exchange of information, they are swamped with information, and that is they will be swamped with DAC 6 reporting.
Yeah.
They are getting thousands of files of information. They have country by country reporting, and they have no clue how to administer the data.
Yeah.
And what I hear from the German audit team is that they might not even look into it. Yeah. They might not even
put in a box and put to one side for Christmas.
Sure, it will be put in a box. But certainly at some point in time there will be, and you can only handle those amounts of data in a digital fashion. There will be algorithms which will enable them to do a risk analysis, to have new ratios and make comparisons and then identify candidates where you might want to have a closer look at, right?
I want to come back to that issue of new technologies. In some ways, maybe this could actually save the arm's length principle, take it back to a transactional base. But before doing that, if you look at the country-by-country reporting, I mean, on balance, it's a good thing, yeah? And I think it's actually been a good thing for multinationals because it's helped you to understand what is your company doing at a global level, yeah? I mean, some directors of large multinationals said, I actually, now I know what's happening within my company. Yeah? I know you're probably more efficient than them, but it's interesting that people would have that view. And the second thing is that if you look at the difficulty of interpretation, I mean, you imagine a large company like Shell, yeah? What they're giving to the tax authority in terms of documentation would probably fill this room. Yeah? How is the tax administrator going to deal with that? And that's why I think part of the answer is the ICAP program. Yeah? I know it's very intensive in terms of resources, but having ICAP and actually having a group of multinationals sitting down with the tax administrations who are receiving collectively, not in bilaterally, but multilaterally, sitting down with the tax administrations and then explaining how they have constructed that data, what judgments they had to make, what they think this data can answer, what they think the data cannot answer. Yeah? To me, that's probably going to be the only way that we get a constructive use of country-by-country reporting. And the difficulty you've got, because it is so resource-intensive, you can only do this for the very large companies. I think currently ICAP kicked off with 7 countries. I think they're up to 17 now, yeah?
But that's part of the problem, because you can certainly have discussions like in ICAP, as we have done with joint audits for many years already, with very well-developed countries. And I'm not speaking about the general economy, I'm speaking about the tax administration. Yeah. And that includes soft factors like a trusted relationship, living up to the rule of law, giving tax certainty, and that's pretty much it. That is true for countries like the UK, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, absolutely. Those are the good things. I'm not talking about the ones where I wouldn't have to trust, but there are,
you better not,
including European countries, there are some where I wouldn't want to have even a joint audit, and let alone an ICAP.
But I mean, that is why I think it's so important of changing the dynamics of the dialogue between business and tax administrations. And to change that dynamic, one thing that has to happen is business has to be prepared to invest in educating the tax administration on how you work. Yeah, because typical tax auditor has never been down a mine, never been to a factory, never been on an offshore drilling rig. Yeah, and if they don't understand the business and the structure, it's really hard to see how you're going to get agreement on what the tax treatment will be.
That's absolutely real, but you will certainly find many tax administrations which would resist on being invited to visiting a factory. In Germany, we do that. We take our auditors to many of the sites so that they have an idea what's going on. And honestly, it's interesting for myself, because sometimes you see products, if you're traveling around and you say, hey, look, this is, I read the name of the company, we own it to 85%, now I see the product. And if you go to a factory, it's eye-opening what's going on there. In Germany that works, but in many other countries, the auditors would just say, no, that might be understood as influencing us, we don't want that. And that's certainly still some way to go. But you're right, absolutely. You need to, don't want to say educate in an arrogant way, but you need to make them understand your business and to help them understand the business.
And in a sense, I think that it's a difficult task, but it's an essential first task. The difficulty you face is that you can make the investment from the perspective of a tax administration to do that for large companies. You can't do it for the average size company, just it's too resource intensive.
That's true.
And I think this is something that I think we should all be thinking about as well. That, I mean, a lot of the debate, the BEPS debate, a lot of the debate in the arm's length principle is focusing very much on very large multinationals. And you have a voice, you have a seat at the table. What I get concerned about is the smaller companies that are encountering transfer pricing problems, but don't have the capacity to deal with them. And these companies can react in one of three ways. One, they can say, okay, I'll just take the risk and I'll just, we'll see what happens. Yes. Two, they can make a massive investment to understand and actually be able to handle transfer. Right? Or three, and this is the usual thing that happens, they say, okay, we'll just stick to our domestic market, yeah? And that's bad economics.
That's certainly true, but because you were talking about the country-by-country reporting earlier, some of you might have seen that Vodafone is making public its country-by-country reporting, so you can download it and can have a look at it. They are part of the B team. That's an association club of a couple of companies. Mostly those are extractives, and they are anyhow obligated to disclose their country-by-country information. Vodafone is certainly not an extractive. It's quite an interesting file. I have the feeling that they blew it up a little bit in terms of size. If you look at certain countries there, Luxembourg, for example, I would have done the same, because the more pages, the less likely it is that some of the things which are buried then in all the information is really coming to light. But it's certainly a very informational piece of work, and will change the approach once the countries are having the capacity to really digest that.
And that's going to take some time. This is why I keep saying we're in a transitional period, yes. But I think once the country by country does kick in, it is going to make a pretty big change. One thing that I would do if I were heading up a multinational, I would actually be publishing it, but I would be publishing a lot more additional information, yeah? What do we contribute to society? What VAT do we pay? What Social Security? You have a good story to tell.
That's right.
And if you don't tell it, nobody's going to tell it for you.
I'm not a big fan of this total tax contribution. That's the name of that. But this is essentially making visible what we are contributing to society. And there are a couple of big four which are driving that, and you have some NGOs which do want to have it. The problem is there is no common reporting scheme for that. So right now, companies are designing for themselves what they understand as contribution to society, and that's why we're not participating in that. When there is a common reporting standard set maybe by an international standard setter, we'll absolutely do it. And then it might be useful information, and then it's comparable, because then it will be under one set of standards. For the time being, it's sort of a waste of money. And honestly, yes, you can say the wage tax. We did earn the money to pay the wages, including the wage tax. True. Still, it's the tax of the employee. So should you include it or not? Some included, some not. Social contributions, you can go on with that. So we are not participating in that one. And disclosing, we thought about that. And if you want to be really ranked high for certain indexes, sustainability indexes, this is giving you brownie points. Still, we are not doing it. And I continue as long as I can in not disclosing, meaning I have to be obligated by law, because I simply don't see the point to make it public to society. I don't publish my own tax return either.
But if you think of it, the current environment is pretty toxic, yeah?
True.
There's a mistrust on the part of government towards multinationals. There's a mistrust on the part of the public and citizens on the and that's bad for our economies, because multinationals can be a force for good, yeah? And you need to have what I call an adult conversation going on between society and companies. And to me, that conversation can only begin when you have more transparency. And if you say you need a standard, well, why does ICC set a standard?
Coming back first to that transparency will help to overcome a toxic situation, I don't believe that's true. Because honestly, from many inquiries I've been receiving from newspapers and journalists, I believe they want to have the bad cases. They want to have the bad cases. And there's always something in your data where you need to give further explanation. But then you are in defense. So if you publish and you can't give as much information as that answers every possible question. It's impossible. So they will wade through it, and they're not looking for the good cases. They're not looking for, hey, they are employing many people in France and they are paying a lot of taxes there. That looks pretty well. I'm making a headline, Siemens is a good taxpayer in all European countries. That's never going to happen. They will look and then they will say, they have a company in the Caymans. Then they will ask, why are you having a company in the Caymans? And you're going to say, hey, we did an acquisition. It was a US company. We're cleaning up the structure. They had a Cayman structure. It will be gone next year. Why will it be gone next year? Why didn't you? And then you are in defense, and it keeps on going.
Hang on.
Like
but the answer to that is that you have to get out there. You have to have lunches with the NGOs. You have to have lunches with journalists that are prepared to actually make the investment. And there are NGOs and there are journalists that are prepared to do that.
The only no, it's maybe.
Be careful.
We are on. Last time I forgot that we were being taped. There are many journalists. Pretty much all of them do understand. But I, so far, had the pleasure to only once had a meeting with somebody. But there are certainly others out there which I understand. But I'll tell you another story. I got a call. That's already some years ago. That was with LuxLeaks, I believe, where the journalist, and it was a good paper, asked, if you tell me the three most outrageous planning structures, aggressive structures German industry is using, we're not naming Siemens in that article.
And you?
No, of course not. Yeah,
Okay, let's move on to something less controversial. Yeah, you raised the issue of technology. Yeah, do you think actually that technology can save the arm's length principle? Will it enable us to get back to a more transactional?
Don't think so, and I don't think so because yes, complexity is certainly a downside of the arm's length principle, but still there is the desire to get more of the fiscal cake. And if the arm's length principle, and I believe it's not improperly applied so far, I don't think that most of the companies are stealing money from developing countries. That's not true. They don't like the allocation, which is the outcome of applying the principle. And you can put in as much technology as you want to. It's not changing the outcome. It's only showing that the outcome is in line with the arm's length principle. Mostly, there's certainly some changes, but they might not all bring more revenue. Some might bring less revenue. Yeah? And certainly the erroneous findings and assessments that you have in many countries wouldn't be possible anymore, because if technology would clearly show the right application, that would, for Italy, for example, make some of the transfer pricing audits very difficult.
And so, if in fact, taking what you're saying is that we need to look for alternatives, what are the alternatives then that would meet those three criteria?
If I would have the alternative, which is meeting all three criteria, especially including consensus, I would be sitting with the OECD right now.
The OECD needs all the help we can get at the moment, yeah?
That is true, but honestly, I can't give them that help. And they might not even listen.
I think they would.
But it's still difficult to convince them, because not invented here is sometimes a problem. So, yes, I mean, Pillar 1 essentially talks about taxation of the digital economy, but there seems to be an agreement that ring fencing shouldn't be happening. So I believe this idea of user contribution, that's going nowhere at the end.
Marketing intangibles?
Marketing intangibles has a good chance, because it has been chipped in. That's chipped in.
You won't understand that. We'll explain it over a drink later on, yes?
Yeah, because the secretary, assistant deputy, or deputy assistant, Chip Harter is his name.
Who actually is going to come and give a fireside chat here in September, so that's something to put in your diary, yeah?
Very nice guy, by the way.
Yeah, super guy.
So it was, don't want to make it a joke again, brought to the table by the US, and the US, so far, they had been a strong defender of the arm's length principle. Yeah. So if they bring something like this to the table, that shows that they believe we have to do something, we have to give something, because apparently the arm's length principle, we can't defend it any longer without any changes.
But continue.
Yes, but I believe they understood two things by now. At the very beginning, from what I heard, is there was the understanding that with that marketing intangible approach, the US might win fiscal income, might get more of the cake. that seems to have changed by now. So there seems to be an understanding, and honestly, it's surprising. Yes, they are having a huge market. That's a big market, but still, Chinese market is bigger, right, in terms of people, and it's growing much faster. The Indian market, more people, growing fast, and then there's the European. So, and yes, they are exporting a lot of things. They are importing as well a lot of things, but their analysts seem to think right now they are not gaining, they might be losing. That's the one thing which is going to change. And then on the other hand, if you look at the first ideas around marketing intangibles, and by the way, I don't like the word. I believe it should better called market intangibles, right, and not marketing intangibles. They are now trying to simplify the idea because that was essentially keeping the arm's length principle and putting a even more complex profit splitting, residual profit splitting scheme, which is called marketing intangibles, then on top. So is that helpful for developing countries? No. I mean, they can't even apply the TP rules as of today. So what I heard is that they are now working on simplifying that approach and that they apparently do look into more allocation key-based methodologies. And if they come up with something like that, that might buy the consensus of developing countries. Certainly, well, not certainly, but maybe not India's consensus, because India is promoting the third alternative, the substantive economic presence, which will not be supported by Germany, most likely, and not by the US. So we might not end up with having consensus at all at the end, which would not be a good outcome.
But I think the market intangibles, I agree, should be market. I see that as a process of continuing the adaptation of the arm's length principle. So you're basically saying the arm's length principle works maybe in 80% of the cases, but here we need some adjustment. Because that's what's been happening over the last 40 years. Yeah, it's been this continual way we've adapted the arm's length principle to changing business structures, to the emergence of new economies like the BRICS, yes, to the global value chains. So to me, it's just we're still on this sort of walk away, not away, but actually adapting the arm's length principle to the new realities. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, this is a positive way of looking at it.
I'm always very positive at my age.
We had been once market leader in telecommunications. So that was, some of you don't even remember those landline phones, right? And they were put to death by voice over IP. Is now voice over IP a development, an adjustment to landline communication, or is it something totally different?
No.
And you might want to say, yes, this is advancing telecommunication. You might want to take the position, no, it's not, because it's totally different. Technically, it's totally different. It's a totally different solution. And our engineers, by the way, they were at that time market leader, and when at that time small US company showed up and said, we have this voice over IP idea, would you want to joint venture with us and develop it? They said, no, it's an internet thing. That's going nowhere.
They were all sacked very quickly.
And that might happen to countries which are now pushing the arm's length principle further, because that might go nowhere too. And then it doesn't matter if you call it an adjustment to it, advancing it, or if you say, no, it's something totally new, because it will be what it will be.
But sometimes the politics is easier if you say we are building on an existing principle that has proved its use and are continuing the process of adaptation. Yeah.
Totally
so in
true.
terms of trying to sell it, because as you know, coming back to this global consensus, you really need a situation where at least all the big economies sign on. Because if you don't have that, you've got a problem in business. Huh?
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. For Christmas, my daughter wanted a lightsaber because she's a big Star Wars fan, but she wanted a real one. So I bought her apparently an unreal one. It's very difficult to get a real one, but I told her it's a real one, and she liked it. And you need always a selling point.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that one, but what about this whole, because some academics, there's a recent paper that Oxford put out, basically said we actually need to divide profits into routine profits and residual profits. Is that going to be something that will fly? Yeah, how do you define routine profits? How do you define normal?
You will not stop discussions about that. It will not be well defined. You will simply have new discussions then, because then it will be a discussion about where ends routine function, where starts residual profit. So I don't believe that this is really helpful at the end. It's a nice theoretical discussion. You can have that nice theoretical discussion. Will it be practically relevant?
Yeah.
I don't believe so.
I agree, and that's why I think this third criteria of administrative feasibility is really important, because it has to be practical both for the tax administration and for the multinational enterprise as well.
Yeah.
I'm getting the impression that it's going to be quite difficult to move forward here.
It will be difficult to get the consensus, and even if there might be some consensus, that might only be a superficial consensus, and if it's then at the level of applying it, give or take inclusive framework, there will certainly be a lot of deviations, especially if it's going to be an allocation key approach. And there, by the way, there might be, the circle might be close to the country-by-country reporting.
Yes.
You might even, and I believe it's not true, but you might even come to think that, did they really go for country-by-country reporting because they wanted to give an additional help for identifying risks and having audit targets, or was there already the idea, if we move then to an allocation key based approach for whatsoever, we already have all the data in the country-by-country reporting.
And I think that was probably what lay behind the NGOs pushing the concept. I think for the tax administrations, probably not. But I said the difficulty is finding something that you're going to get this buy-in, because if you think about it, I mean, at the moment, I think the OECD is, really trying hard to find a way forward. In June, they're going to issue sort of a roadmap of how they're going to approach this up to the end of 2020. But asking yourself, well, what are the options there? I mean, one would be they get a real consensus, yes, all the big players signing on. They get consistent implementation. That's important. It's not just having a consensus on the principles, it's also how we go about applying those principles. And to do that, Christian, I think we need to have a peer review, a monitoring, yeah? We mean that was foreseen in the 95 transfer pricing guidelines. It was applied once to Mexico, yeah? It worked very well in the Global Forum on Transparency. You need to have some mechanism that says, hey, you said you would do that? Are you doing it, yeah? So that's one outcome, which in many ways will be the best outcome. Yeah? I think a second outcome is OECD just declares failure. OECD doesn't declare failure, not with the G20. Yeah? I mean, probably there what would happen is say we need more time. But even going back to the G20 at the end of 2020 and saying, well, we need another 2 years, I can imagine the reactions of some of the prime ministers and the president say, hey, you've had 4 years, why do you come up with this? The third solution is they fudge it. Yeah? They draft around it, they pretend there's a consensus, politicians go away and say, we've got a consensus, and all hell breaks loose. Huh? And that's the worst outcome, because then the pressure is off to actually find a good solution, and each country has a lot of freedom in terms of interpreting it. Yeah? And that's why I think in all of this debate, an integrated part of the debate has to be, what are we going to do about disputes, cross-border disputes? Yeah? Because I think already we are seeing a big increase in the number of disputes. And what's interesting is that in the past there was probably about 11 countries that accounted for 90% of disputes, of which 9 were OECD countries, and then you had India and China, India in particular for that. Yeah. But what we're now seeing is that you're getting more and more disputes between OECD countries and developing countries, and you're getting disputes beginning to emerge between developing countries themselves. Yeah? So the whole area is becoming a bit more complex. I actually think it's a good thing you have these disputes between developing countries, because it means they have the same interests as well in resolving them. Yeah? So how are we going to move forward on this debate? And I actually think that whatever goes to the G20, in the context of BEPS 2, and by the way, I hate that BEPS 2, this is not about BEPS. This is about the allocation rules. Yes? BEPS was about compliance. Base erosion, profit share. This is about something much more fundamental. Yeah, I don't think you should even have the BEPS title there. But yeah, when they report on the outcomes to the G20, they'll have to have something that says, look, given where we are, we actually now need to reconsider. Reconsider the approach that we have to dispute resolution.
Yeah, and it will be much more difficult because if we assume that it will be marketing intangible or something like that, that will lead to multilateral disputes. You can't split in a bilateral relationship, it will be multilateral. There is absolutely no tool yet for a multilateral approach, right? And so there needs to be a totally new tool being designed, and that in the light of even the old dispute resolution mechanisms not really fully functional working. So that will be challenging, and there are many other challenges. What are you doing with losses, for example? How are you treating losses in the marketing intangible scenario. Are you then having, well, a negative marketing intangible, sort of a residual loss split toward, or are you carrying them forward and then deducting in future years when you are profitable? That will be a wonderful discussion with source countries. And I believe, I don't want to be negative, but I'm not fully convinced that there will be consensus at the end about that. It's a 50-50 chance or something.
Except between two countries.
Which wouldn't be a real consensus then at the OECD level then, right?
It depends, because these are two very big countries, yes?
I mean, the US might certainly...
The US and China, I think, are going in the same direction, yeah? If you listen to what China has been saying recently, the US could be saying the same.
That is only true for the tax part.
For the tax part, yeah.
I mean...
I don't want to talk about politics.
Well, you earlier were saying political things, and so it will be very difficult for them to agree with the US on something. And then on the other hand, with China right now, I'm not so sure. Yes, they have a big market, and they would apparently still win from that marketing intangible approach. But then on the other hand, all their multinational companies, they are now real multinational.
Exactly.
Yeah? It's not
so the same as with the same interest as US multinationals.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So they might, over time, and it will not take long, they might even lose with that approach, because they are exporting like hell. They try to take over the world in a way, and in some areas they might even succeed in doing so, and then they're going to lose with that approach. So I'm not fully convinced that, and normally they are in for the long term. It's not that they are planning in 5-year cycles, and so they certainly have an idea of the impact of that in the year 2040 or something.
But it was interesting that I was at the UN Tax Committee 3 weeks ago in New York, and they were discussing the report on digitalization, and basically the countries split into two groups, the OECD and China, and the other group, India and developing countries. And you could actually see, China was very close to the position of the OECD countries. But it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of dynamic develops. Plus also the fact that some of the big platforms, the Alibamas, the JDs, they are now moving very fast outside of China. Already they're in many Asian countries. They begin to move into Europe. They're beginning to move into Africa. So again, the type of debate that we're having about the Googles and the Amazon, we're going to have the same type of debate about these companies. And the US and China will have the same interest there. So
true, absolutely. It will be France that will not be thrilled about it, because then you have the Louis Vuittons, where there would be much more profit being taxed in China in light of the Chinese market, which is the most important for them.
And I think one of the things that I think will happen over the next few months is that the Europeans will be saying, well, okay, before we sign on to any consensus, we want an impact assessment. And you saw the statement that came out from the German finance minister, where I think one of the institutes had estimated, how much was it, Raffaele? They will lose 17 billion. It's a very large amount of revenue if they moved in this direction.
And the revenue estimates, especially of institutes, and even more especially when those are government institutes, you can forget them, because they're always wrong, right?
They're too low or too big?
That depends. If it's a new rule which is being implemented and they're about to estimate the administrative cost for companies, they're always too low. If it's about a potential threat, then they're always too high. So they're always wrong.
But on balance, they're right.
Remember the VAT. No, on balance, they might be right. It's true. Remember the VAT fraud that keeps on increasing year by year. I don't even know if that might be bigger than the whole GDP by now. So I haven't looked at the most recent number, but it's certainly a billion or so. Used to be 470 billion the last time, so a trillion. Yes, impact analysis, and we'll be starting the same for our company once we have enough detail and sort of hard detail that this is not work for the waste bin, but something where we can really see and lobby then on that basis. And Johnson & Johnson, by the way, they already did that.
They're doing that, And I think that process for government will probably start towards the late autumn of this year, because by then people will have an idea of what's on the table, and at that point they're going to say, fine, what is it going to cost us? Because that's what governments are concerned with. What is it going to cost us in terms of lost revenue? And with those figures, it's actually going to make the getting a consensus more difficult, because people will see if we move in this direction, we're going to be losing. So an interesting debate there. But coming back to the disputes, I actually think that one side effect of this debate is we may see a new momentum towards moving to some form of mandatory dispute settlement. I don't use the word arbitration because it's not very popular, but some form of mandatory dispute settlement. Is that where we should be moving?
I hope so, because at the end, for us, we only don't want to be double taxed. Yeah, I don't care, and that's honestly true. But okay, I care. I would rather prefer to be taxed in countries with a lower tax rate than in a higher tax rate. But I would give that up if I could avoid double taxation.
And what about double taxation that was predictable? Is that easier to deal with?
Actually, no, because this is still a double burden to the company. It's only not a surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly not to have a surprise is a positive thing, but
So you actually get certainty that you're going to have double taxation, huh?
that is something I wouldn't buy in, because then I would have to sell to my management that our effective tax rate is increasing by a couple of percentage points, but we are certain about it.
Yeah.
And then I could certainly tell the outcome of that discussion. No, that certainty we don't want to have. We have to get rid of the double taxation, and I believe this is a fair pledge, because it's fair to do something against aggressive tax planning and to do something against the profit shifting and base erosion, absolutely. But it's absolutely unfair to be taxed on the same profit twice.
But isn't there a danger that when these figures come out that show the revenue loss, people say, well, actually, maybe we can overcome that if we just take more money from the multinationals?
Yeah, they might then adjust the tax rate upwards, or they might convert to Pillar 2 and will say we need minimum tax and we restrict deductibility. That's certainly likely. And it's a German position. They are very much in favor of this Pillar 2 because we are already having CFC rules on the one hand, and we are limiting the deductibility of certain expenses. So we're not that far away from that. There is such a danger, absolutely.
Okay, let's take some questions. There's a question. Should Christine for him, yeah? So the question is, what is your view on recent Indian proposals for profit attribution
to permanent establishments?
Yeah.
Not a big surprise in a way, because it certainly emphasizes that some countries do want to go away from the arm's length principle and want to use allocation key based methods. And so I wasn't surprised. The timing was a bit surprising, maybe. But that was certainly not a coincidence. I believe that was deliberately chosen to say, folks, we can even move away. We don't need consensus at the end, and we'll do it this way. So that might be the outcome. It doesn't help the substantive economic presence proposal. So this is sort of a contradiction, because if you want to have more PEs, widen the scope of a PE, then you don't want to threaten all the other countries, which would have to give up fiscal income by saying, and by the way, for those additional PEs, we will even tax more and use a new system for that.
I mean, that
sort of
seems
strange.
very much sort of a situation that is going to lead to a lot of sort of international controversy. Yeah?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Raffaele, you had a question. Announce your name so people know who you are.
Yes, Raffaele Petruzzi from the Institute for also International Tax Law. Thank you very much, first of all, for the interesting inputs and discussions on this relevant topic. When I think of the ways that people tend to criticize the arm's length principle, most of the time, the major point is that it's too complex. It's too complex to deal with. It's too complex to deal with from multinational side and from tax administration side, which is actually a point that makes me smile a little bit sometimes, because I think, well, isn't tax law in general complex? Otherwise, we would not have any people in this room right now. So I think, in general, we're dealing with complex issues every day in our life. Apart from the arm's length principle, we will not have a simpler life without the arm's length principle, especially if I also consider what the alternatives are right now on the table. And if I look at the alternatives that have been put forward right now by the OECD, thinking of the way that it could be implemented, especially for the companies that have been conceived, these highly digitalized businesses, probably is not that easy to deal with those alternatives either. So before throwing in the garbage something that we have been developing for 100 years. And we have been working on it intensively in the past years during the BEPS project, providing guidance, providing trainings to tax administrations. Isn't it better to leave it as it is, but rather think at ways to make it work better, meaning simplification measures, meaning more capacity buildings, meaning more cooperation between tax administrations and companies?
Roughly, I totally understand your point. Yes, you are a very intelligent person and you understand it totally. You can't generalize from that. And I believe that in developing countries, they really have a capacity problem. Absolutely, you can overcome that if you do something for capacity building. But it might at the end be not the most prominent or the real reason why they are fighting it. I still believe they want to have more of the cake, and they hate this arm's length principle because it's old and it has been invented and implemented by the industrialized countries. So they simply dislike it, and then you need a reason, because otherwise it's difficult to politically sell that you simply dislike something. So you want to have a reason. And then they convert to complexity. And yes, it's absolutely true. There are many topics in tax which are way more complex. If you go for reorganization and you apply the Austrian Umgründungsrecht or the German so business restructuring rules, they are super complex. And even if you go for the partnerships and the income tax problems around partnerships in the international context, way more complex than transfer pricing. But then in developing countries, well, you don't have those many Umgründungs or Restructuringsfälle, and you don't have very complicated partnership income allocation topics, but they deal a lot with transfer pricing. So it might be that, well, this is the complexity they are faced with. So it's certainly sort of not the real argument, but it is a topic for them. And then I believe there is, with regard to multinational groups, a certain unhappiness about the fact that, yes, this arm's length principle still is artificial, because nobody can take away the fact that we can arrange our setup the way we can do it. And this is sort of what there was the will to counter that with bringing in people function with the Dempe concept, so that you move away from the starting point of contractual relationships and you bring in more facts to double check it, so that it's not this absolute freedom. But still, now we are moving 100 folks to a research center. Yeah? We can adjust our facts as we want to. And that is something where I believe the old concept which we all grew up with, that one legal entity is a taxpayer and should be treated as one taxpayer, they don't want to accept that any longer for a multinational group. So they want to look at that group in its totality. And the arm's length principle is a very poor proxy if you want to take that approach. And that, I believe, is sort of in the background.
Short question. Short.
Thank you again,
Maybe.
also for the discussion.
Forget about the thanks, get to the question. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to continue the Rafael's thinking, and basically to ask that I think that LP is a dynamic proxy, because if now we find something, LP is not the same as it was, like, for example, 80 years ago. And should we basically change the principle, LP principle, whether, for example, for all these 80 years we changed the transfer pricing rules, and now the discussion on whether we can change the allocation keys and we should establish new allocation keys is more discussion of transfer pricing rather than discussion of the arm's length principle itself. And so my question is, maybe we just need to change the transfer pricing rules for new allocation keys to give like more pie to these developing countries rather than to go away from the arm's length principle.
So if I understand you correctly, then you would still apply the arm's length principle, but give with different means more of the cake to the developing countries. Could certainly do that, and in a way this first try of the marketing intangible is keep the arm's length standard intact and set something else on top. Absolutely. Will that be the end of development? I don't think so.
I actually disagree, because I actually think most developing countries are reasonably comfortable with the arm's length principle, yeah? They may not like the outcome, but they feel the outcome is perhaps constrained by the fact that they don't have access to the type of comparable information that they need. They don't have the capacity to negotiate. Yeah, because at the end of the day, transfer pricing is very much about negotiating. And I actually think for the developing countries, the approach I would adopt is say, look, before I get into these debates, I actually want to change the dynamic of the dialogue that we're having, which is why you can come down to cooperative compliance. Yes? Cooperative compliance at the moment has only been tried by developed countries, but I think it can actually work very well in developing countries as a way to avoid some of these issues. Because if you're sitting down in a cooperative compliance program, you're Siemens and Ghana, yeah, and you're there 18 months negotiating, at the end of that process, Ghana understands how you operate. You understand their concerns. And it's then easier actually to go and say, okay, on this basis, how do we now apply the arm's length principle?
Well, possible, maybe even likely, but we had discussions for months and years with some projects in some African countries, I'm not saying which, it was not Ghana, where they never understood it. And we invested so much time and effort and money into it, and we really tried to make them understand the project and explain to them how it works and that there is a double taxation treaty, how that works. They simply didn't get it. And honestly, that has nothing to, they are not dumb. They're not dumb. They can understand it if they want to. They simply didn't. Yeah? This is the only way I can see it, look at that. And yes, in an ICAP, certainly there's pressure from other countries on them that might help the process.
We need an ICAP simple, sort of is
or joint audit or whatever. Absolutely. So yes, that's making it a bit more likely. But on the other hand, for me, that is still a frustrating experience, and I'm not sure if that's leading somewhere. It's a good interim measure. And for me, this discussion on the ALP is, but maybe that's because I'm not a transfer pricing person. This is like our engineers with their old telecommunication technology. They were super expert, and there was not much more that they could get out of that technology. And there was then a new approach, and they simply disliked the new approach, but because they were so used and trained in the old technology. And if there is, and I'm not saying that there is something better, but if there would be something better with more certainty, and consensus and easy to apply and being administered, why not using that?
Well, I mean, there is an alternative on, and that's global formula apportionment.
Yeah, right.
And it's simple.
It's super.
A principle.
I could live with that.
You can have it's very, and yet, I haven't heard any developing countries say that's where they want to go. Yeah.
That's true.
And if you actually, I've heard a lot of NGOs, I've heard a lot of academics. Yeah. But when when the rubber hits the road, they say, hang on, how are we going to get agreement on the factors? How are we going to get agreement on the weights? Yeah. Because that determines how the base is going to be divided up. Yeah? And who's going to manage the system? Because if you want global formula apportionment, you need some sort of world tax organization.
Yeah, I mean, Heinz-Klaus Kroppen some weeks ago, right, at the Kaeser Vorlesung, he just presented his idea about it. And that is a system which on its face.
So you could imagine if there was a political will, that's where we could
just
go to.
Check if there's something else in his water. Right? So
I thought you were going to drink my water for a minute.
I just wanted to ensure that this is really water.
No, so in a sense, but it's a bit like you have an old car and you have a new car. Yeah, the new car's never actually been on the road. It looks great. It shines. It's brilliant. It has all the latest gadgets. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and the old car there, the Model T. Yeah, it's been through everything. Yeah, it's been with you for 25 years. You've adapted the tires. You put the new brakes on. Yeah, but you know how to do it. Yeah, of course the new car looks more attractive. Yeah, than the old car. Yeah, and it's the same here with global formula apportionment versus the arm's length principle. Yeah, which is why I think you're finished now. Which is why I think the real debate here is where do you want to be on this spectrum of pure arm's length to pure global?
She was really brief, and we are talking and talking.
Oh, sorry. Last question. You're a gentleman, yes, I'm not, yes.
You're welcome.
Global formula apportionment also relies on allocation keys, and in several years it will be the same discussion on allocation keys if we adopt this. And the second statement is that I think that basically that discussion that I do not understand the conflict between those that on significant economic presence and marketing intangibles, because for me significant economic presence more relates to establishing a PE, and marketing intangibles more on allocation of profits. And then we could have it both together, but from different perspectives. Thanks.
No, that's it. We're going to finish now, yeah? Just a last comment then, Christian. So how would you like to see us move forward in this debate? What would be the components of a sort of a compromise that you think that's something that business could buy into?
Well, first of all, I would like to see that the whole discussion is branded the way it really is, and that is nothing around base erosion profit shifting, so
Yes,
it's not BEPS
yeah.
2. It is about allocation of taxation rights.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a topic in between countries where we are the victims of the outcome.
Victims,
Victims of the outcome, yeah, because
participants in the outcome.
participants, that would be my second wish, that we can really participate in the process. Yes, we can that via BIAC and ICC, but sometimes, you know that from your past career, this participation is sort of on paper, and
it's changing, though.
it's changing. It's slowly maybe getting better, but it's very slowly. So that would be a nice thing, to really be able to participate in the process and give some input, being able to provide simulations and make transparent what the different concepts will have as an impact. And then finally, and we talked about that, I really believe that there needs to be an improved dispute resolution, because there will be in all scenarios disputes. You rightfully said that there will be then the discussion about the allocation key. So disputes will never go away.
Yeah.
If it's an easy system, then there will be less disputes, but then you still have countries which are going to grab more, so there will be disputes. So we need more dispute resolution, and it's absolutely fair. This is a battle about the allocation of taxation rights, and that's why I said we are the victims, we are the collateral. You could say collateral to that. And the collateral is the double taxation. And there should be no such collateral.
That sounds a very nice way to finish this meeting. Thank you, Christian. I think it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank Eva. Where's Eva? Yeah, and Milena and all the team that's put this together. The next meeting on the Fireside Chat, we probably will have one with Chip Harper on the 6th of September here in Vienna. And then on the 18th of September, we'll have Serge Geroff, who is the chief economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction. And he's going to talk about populism and tax. He's not a tax person. Yeah? Populism. He chose that topic. I would never have thought about it. Yeah? So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.